Here is a question. Does comedy need to have heart? Now, what do I mean by that? Recently, I saw a Q&A by a local filmmaker, a filmmaker who's gone on to great success in their own life. And they were talking about comedy and how comedy needed to have an emotional core. They referenced a scene in Wayne's World where Garth and Wayne are sitting on the roof of a car.
Sometimes I wish I could boldly go where no man's gone before. But I'll probably stay in Aurora.
They said this was their favorite scene in the movie because it gave the rest of the movie an emotional weight. No matter what crazy or ludicrous thing Wayne did, the audience was willing to go with him on this journey because of this scene. The filmmaker referenced Family Guy as a sort of counterexample. They said that they like Family Guy, but that it's not really what they would consider great comedy because it has no emotional core. It gave me a lot of thought because oftentimes I would be on the edge of disagreeing. To me, what makes great comedy is great comedy. And I often feel this need to have this overly sentimental or emotional edge to these comedic films can sometimes be a detriment. Now, obviously, comedies with a emotional message or a heartfelt scene is not necessarily new. But I feel like what I'm talking about and what a lot of these filmmakers talk about is a modern wave I would consider the Apatow effect. Judd Apatow started his career in the 90s, but he gained massive popularity in the 2000s thanks to the show Freaks and Geeks, and then to movies like 40-Year-Old Virgin and Knocked Up. Now, I'm going to say something a little controversial. I don't really find a lot of Judd Apatow's movies particularly funny. They, in my opinion, rely on some pretty cheap one-note gags. Basically just like cursing. I mean, it's just like that feels like the joke a lot of time. They're cursing or they're smoking weed. It's not clever. You know, it's not like a written joke. They don't do jokes. They do improv, more so. They just have characters riffing. That's not to say I don't like any movie from this era. I love Superbad, which is not directed by Judd Apatow, but it's definitely in the Apatow style. That's another thing to know. When Judd Apatow became popular, there were just so many imitators. A lot of them produced by him as well. So there was a real Apatow brand during that time. But obviously the comedian who became the biggest success out of all those was Seth Rogen. And he really continued that style of filmmaking up until, comedies just straight up weren't made anymore. And I like a lot of Seth Rogen comedies. I think he's a very funny guy. Here's my main point, is I think this emotional aspect of this story, it is a crutch. It feels a lot of the time like a crutch to comedy. When comedies are too scared to commit to just being funny, they add in this emotional subtext to try to reel the audience in. While yes, I do like some of these movies, I think the best comedies are the ones that are just comedies. And what I mean is that they're not trying to divert you from the humor. They are trying to just commit to being as funny as possible. I'm talking about movies like Top Secret, Airplane, Monty Python. These films don't need some arbitrary scene where the characters are crying. It's just funny, And I think that's a lot harder to do, to just make a movie where your main goal is to be funny. Because you could tell me a movie like Ted is main goal, maybe it's to be funny, but I just don't buy it. I was recently talking to someone who was writing a script, and it was this pilot to this kind of absurd comedy. The gags were really all over the place, and frankly not that well thought out. And then they tell me the backstory to their character, and it's this big, dramatic backstory. And then I tell them, why don't you just make a drama? It feels like you're just trying to make a drama. But they're like, no, it's a comedy. But you're making the stupidest comedy ever. But you're giving this guy the backstory of Schindler's List for no reason. Here's my challenge to writers. Put all of that effort you're putting into their emotional backstory, into their subtext, put it into making jokes. That's what people used to do when they wrote comedies. They used to write jokes. Just try to make the funniest jokes ever. And if you feel you need to have an emotional subtext in your movie in order for it to work, then maybe what you should be saying to yourself is, I should just be making this funnier. Because clearly it's not funny enough to stand on its own. Because humor, that is the hardest thing to do. Humor is much harder than drama. I remember I saw a movie, Daddy's Home 2, and the movie just stops. so that every character can finish their arc. And it's just unwatchable when the movie just loses itself completely dead in its tracks at that scene, when it should have just been a series of gags, which is what Will Ferrell excels at. Will Ferrell's comedy, like Anchorman, was designed to be pure laughs. And then he kind of had to transform those movies into some weird version of the Apatow films, which just didn't work. It's also a problem of, if you don't know improv, then trying to replicate improv in your writing isn't going to work. Watch comedies, and don't just watch comedies from the last few years. Watch classic comedies. And by the way, when I say focus on the humor, that doesn't mean make it dumb. Look at a movie like Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove doesn't have a single character to connect to. But it doesn't matter because it's Dr. Strangelove and has amazing gags and it's amazing satire. Your comedy can still have a point. It can still be deep. But its deepness and its point can be rooted in the comedy instead of an external element. Yes, so that would be my challenge to writers. Write a comedy, but write a real comedy. Just focus on the humor. Stop trying to make the audience cry in the third act. Just make something funny. I want to see someone actually write something that is just funny and it's just about being funny. I don't give a shit about your character's arc. Write jokes. Create good jokes. That's my TED Talk. Thank you very much.